And we are now live. How are you doing, Cujo?
I'm great, Dino. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. I got the military an actual Top Gun pilot who has become my friend. Look at these pictures, man. What do we make of this? What do we make of a guy who was an F-22 fighter pilot, F-15 squadron commander? Do I have that right?
Mostly. I flew the F-15 for most of the time as an instructor, and then I was a commander of an F-22 squadron for a while.
And then you were the lead subject matter expert at what we would refer to as the US Air Force Top Gun School on the subject of debriefing. And that's the topic of
That's
your
right.
book, correct?
That's right.
And
Exactly.
so you've gone from this life of being a fighter pilot to delivering corporate presentations around the country. Which do you find more risky, Rob?
They both have their own element of risk, but I tell you this much, Dino, they both require us to start different each and every day.
Absolutely, and thank you for the lead in. And that's the topic of today, and the topic of this webcast series, which I'm rolling out with friends who I believe can make a significant difference for people. And I know that there's someone on this call who needs to hear what Cujo has to say. We're always starting different. Every sales call, every meeting, every flight in the Air Force is a chance to be learning, a chance to be starting different. And of all the people I know, Rob's family has connected their values with their behaviors and created experiences in the world. And Rob, you shared a little bit with me about your family. Your brother Anthony was a helicopter pilot, and your brother John, a field officer, I believe Bronze Star. Is that correct? Or was that your dad?
That was Dad. Dad got the
Dad?
Bronze Star in Vietnam. Yeah. John's the field artillery officer. Yeah.
So we're talking about a family that has made a significant contribution. I would be remiss if I didn't say for all of us on the line, Cujo, thank you for your contribution. All right, man,
Well,
we're going to jump in.
That was a privilege. Okay.
We're going to jump in. We're going to jump in. I want to give people the bottom line up front. So here's the bottom line up front. What if there was a button you could push in your brain to let you be as psychologically brave as a Top Gun fighter pilot? With all that's going on, people are going into fight or flight all day. How do these folks find the bravery they need to do what they do? And when I talked to my dad about this series, and here's the text message from Grandpa Rob, he said, hit that button. So Rob, you call this book Debrief to Win, and people use a lot of different terms. They talk about debriefs in business, we talk about coaching, we talk about huddles, we talk about second opinions. And the reason that I brought this word second opinion up is because it comes up in the intro to your book, in the acknowledgments, and people may pass over. Now, I've read Rob's book 3 times since I read it the first time in August. I've flown myself to go find him at a workshop that he was delivering up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And my question, Rob, why do you think that coaching and debriefing, why aren't they done by everyone all the time when we know the kind of effect they can have on an organization?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons. Here. First of all, nobody teaches us how to do it. So there's a fear factor of, am I going to expose myself to the risk of trying to make this thing happen, realizing that I may not necessarily know what I'm taking on in doing so. And the other piece about it is that when we do try, oftentimes what it is we've done is we've created a condition of blame and shame. So the outcome of the process ends up being something that's destructive to what it is that a team needs. And because of that, folks shy away from it.
Yeah, I think there's another reason. And that's that in most organizations, your life doesn't depend on it. In most organizations, whether you debrief after a sales call, whether you debrief after you start rolling out a program among your 6,000 employees, your life doesn't depend on it. But here's the question: what if your life depended on it? If a doctor told you you were going to die, would you guys get a second opinion? So that's the question I want to start with, because here's the picture from Rob's book. And I just want you guys to take a moment to digest to his dearest Diane, who saved my life from cancer by insisting on a second opinion. Rob, take us back to that time, and I'll show this picture, which isn't as glamorous. but the picture is about you confronting the brutal truth of what was going on in your life at the time. So take us back to this and what happened in your life at this time. I think most people don't recognize, they know you as a fighter pilot, but they may not know you as a cancer survivor.
Yeah, so I mean, the short story is I'm on the staff at Headquarters U.S. European Command. I'm working in a non-flying capacity in Stuttgart, Germany, to advance our strategic interests there. And I had some symptoms that popped up that were kind of scary. This was the second time that I had experienced the symptoms. The first time I didn't share anything about them with anyone because I was flying and I didn't want to lose the opportunity to fly, and I figured I was bulletproof anyway and I could get past it and things were going to get better. The second time I was in a position to talk about it, and so I told my wife. And when I shared with her what these symptoms were, she was a little bit horrified. And she said, "Hey, listen, you need to go get checked." And I said, "Look, I'm fine. Okay, I've now confessed this. I've shared this bit of information, so we're able to go forward." She said, "No, that's not good." So I went and saw the doc. The doc said, "You're young, you're fit, you're fine." And I was happy with that. And I came back and I said, you see, we're okay, honey." And she said, "No, we're not." And she kept on pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. She conspired with one of my good friends, who's a doctor, to call me in Germany and say, "Hey, boss, you need to go get checked." I called him a traitor. Turns out he was right. Turns out Diane was right. They found a tumor that had been growing for 10 years in my lower colon. It changes everything for me, but it saved my life. And so I'm eternally grateful to my beautiful bride, Diane, and to Dr. Adam Epic Cole for the tandem of insisting on a second opinion.
How long ago did you write this book, Cujo?
Wrote that in 2018.
2018, so 2 years ago. I want to read a line from the beginning of the book. "We've recently survived the Great Recession and recognize the massive challenges this poses. It's my goal to play a small part in ensuring we can prevent a future recession from taking such a toll. Now more than ever, literally everything is on the line." You think that's going to resonate with people during this time of COVID-19, my friend?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
Look, this is a perfect forcing function, Dino, for those of us that have been potentially remiss in embracing the power of teams, to do something about it now while we have the chance.
To confront the most brutal facts, as you did. And there's a process, by the way, that the military follows. So, in this whole idea of starting different, every chance you guys have to learn something that helps you to be better at what you do is a chance for you to have a repeat performance. So here's the next bottom line. What if there was a button that you guys could push to be continuously excellent? We're talking Top Gun good. There is a button that you can push. Again, hit that button. So before I jump into this and let Rob give you the what, why, and how of the Top Gun's debriefing process, let me start with some good news and some bad news. So the good news is, number one, everyone on this phone call was born with a brain. All of your teammates, all of your employees, all of your customers. The bad news is we weren't born with a user manual knowing how to use it. So Rob, let's give people a little background on how you and I met. We met through the Vistage organization, and you recently were given a top new Vistage Speaker Award. How many Vistage groups would you say you presented to at this point?
120 maybe.
120? In how long a period of time?
Just over a year, maybe a year and a half, somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah, so pretty phenomenal. Vistage, for those who don't know, is the leading CEO membership organization in the world, around 25,000 members. They meet in small groups. They've been around since the 1950s, and they bring speakers in, speakers like Rob, who actually can change people's lives. Now, for years, I had been thinking about this concept of debriefing, and what I knew from the military was something called an after-action review. But Rob, tell me where the title, because this is my first introduction to you. When someone mentioned this book, and in August I bought it. Tell us a little bit about the title and how you came to call it Debrief to Win.
Yeah, so the title reflects where this whole process comes to us from. And in the fighter aviation world, debriefing kicked off in World War I. And if you think about the time frame there, you've got two sides that are using air power for the first time in a combat environment. just over a decade after the airplane in its current version was fielded. And so neither side knew how to navigate this complex environment, and both sides were concerned with the losses that they were experiencing. And so both sides adopted a process of debriefing after the mission. And the whole intent of the debrief was to learn from those who survived the mission what it was that allowed them to survive, so they could factor that in to how it is that they go forth the next day. And the outcomes of this process involve building teams that work and inspiring mutual support. In essence, how it was that you win in fighter combat is by debriefing the mission so that you're better equipped to start different the next day.
So let's talk about how much we've won as a U.S. Air Force since this process was put in place. So you shared with me a couple of facts. I think 1954 was the last time that what happened, Rob?
1953 is the last time that enemy air power has successfully targeted U.S. troops on the ground.
So the U.S. Air Force has had total dominance of the skies since 1953. And this plane that you, go ahead.
Yeah, and what that really means is that we're able to support our teammates in all the different domains by virtue of protecting them from the skies. And that's something that's very, very important to us that flew the mighty F-15, that still fly the F-15 and the F-22 today.
So which one was the score? Was the 100-0? Which plane was that?
Yeah, so the 104-0 kill ratio, that's the F-15. That's just over my shoulder over here.
104-0. I see things a little bit differently. You know, I'm a history buff, and when I start thinking about the history of debriefing, and even before this, you know, it strikes me that people who've had their lives at risk, generally warriors, have always debriefed. You know, I read Aurelius every year. Marcus Aurelius in the year 100 was Roman emperor. He had a book he wrote called The Meditations, was his thoughts on what he needed to learn to be better in life. And you and I share something. We share the fact that we both have a little bit of Jesuit in our background. You at the high school you went to, and me with the college. And Saint Ignatius Loyola was a warrior who set up the Jesuit tradition, and he had a meditation process that he put in place to meditate twice a day. So there's something that warriors have always done. And I think because I started going blind when I was 17, I see things a little bit differently than others. One of the concepts I want you to talk about, Rob, is this concept of psychological safety. I think it could be the most important thing for CEOs to hear, the most important thing for parents to hear. And I want to give a little definition that you shared in your book. And psychological safety describes a climate in which people are comfortable being and expressing themselves. And the reason this jumped out at me is probably 10 or 12 years ago, when I was new to the Vistage circuit and had probably just reached my 120th talk, I was going through an airport in Charlotte and got on a plane next to a gentleman who ran flight safety for US Air. It was US Air at the time. And at the time, US Air had a very long string of no accidents. And I asked this executive, what's the most important thing that you guys have done to make sure that air travel is safe? And he said, the most important thing that we've done is not penalize pilots for admitting when they make a mistake. So Rob, can you talk about when the airlines, when they say they don't penalize pilots for making a mistake, what are they really saying when they say that they're not penalizing them? How does that take shape?
They're saying that they're creating a condition where you can speak openly about failure so that you can learn from it. And here's what we're up against, Dino. We're up against this in any organization, business organization, military organization, family organization, whatever it might be. We're up against the fact that somewhere in our evolution, it becomes not only uncool, but actually dangerous to admit to failure. And in an environment where it's dangerous to admit to failure, we then shy away from having those conversations, and by risk, and by the way, we create an environment where people aren't free to talk about the important things that have to be discussed in order for us to advance our collective mission. Psychological safety is where we create the conditions to have the kinds of conversations that allow us to admit that maybe things aren't going perfectly, that allow us to admit that, yeah, we did fail at something so that we can learn from it, fix things, and do better tomorrow. And
the biggest challenge that I see in the corporate world with 4 of my last 5 major clients have not created environments where people are psychologically safe to discuss mistakes.
And you know why? Part of it is again, we haven't been trained on how to do it. Part of it is the acknowledgement that if we're going to go down this path, it's going to require us to be vulnerable. Just this morning, and in fact, one of the participants who's probably online today was sharing with me that he was looking up, he's doing a project in Colorado, and he's been trying to find video of debriefings done well. And he found a clip from the movie Top Gun. He said, Cujo, if I'm not mistaken, this is a horrible example. I said, yeah, it actually is a horrible example. It's a horrible example because you have no vulnerability. You have somebody that's coming in attacking, and the outcome of the process is blame and shame. And that's a challenge.
Well,
and one of the things that
go ahead.
This is very, very important that people understand. The movie Top Gun, it's awesome. It's an exciting film. We've got the new one coming out in December. It helped inspire me to go down this path. But one of the things that you miss from that movie is the fact that when the debrief door closes, ego is left outside. When the debrief door closes, rank plays literally no role. And when the debrief door closes, all that we care about is that we get to the honest truth of what happened so that we can actively learn and change behaviors and decision-making processes so that we evolve. That's what it's all about in the movie. The movie misses that, Dino.
Well, listen, there's a lot of great movies that miss the point. There's a lot of great movies about salespeople that aren't really what it takes to be a great sales professional. So we could go down that too. I sent this picture to Rob this morning because here during lockdown, I got a buddy who visits me every day. I feel a little bit like Tony Soprano in the first season. But the interesting thing about this guy is he won't get out of the pool when he's by himself. He'll let me feed him. He'll let me throw bread or put some oats in the pool, but he will not get out of the pool. The interesting thing is when he has a wingman with him, it's a totally different story. So here's him and his buddy, and they're out of the pool. They come right up to me. And this Rob, I'm going to ask you for some tips and ask you for some thoughts. What are some of the biggest tips you can give people in terms of creating environments of psychological safety for people on their teams?
First step was always to emphasize what is our purpose, what is our why, how come we're organized here, and what are we trying to achieve? And if we share that bond of purpose, then that's going to give us a foundation upon which we can build. The next piece is we want to invite collaboration and participation. We want to make sure that everybody recognizes that not only do they have a voice, but we want to hear it. And they're not going to be, if they come up with a suggestion, a recommendation that isn't perfect, that's okay. That's fine. That's part of our process of learning. And we're going to appreciate, we're going to express our appreciation. And at the same time, we're going to get rid of this notion that failure is bad. The opposite of failure being bad is failure is good. And the faster that we can fail, the more that we can learn from a failure, the better equipped that we're going to be to survive disruption. And this is my quick capture of what it is that Amy Edmondson writes about in her book, The Fearless Organization, which if there was one book that I would recommend people read to understand this and to apply it, it's this one. You'll finish it in a couple of hours. The lessons that you learn from it will last a lifetime.
The Fearless Organization. So one of the things you talked about is connecting with values and being able to connect with them on a daily basis and the importance of that. It struck me that the reason fighter pilots can be so brave is because they feel psychologically safe. General Mattis talks about it in his book. So does Admiral McCraven. They talk about creating environments where soldiers feel safe to make mistakes so that they can learn. Because if you're feeling safe, you can learn. Now, Cujo, I'm going to have you go through, and I'm just going to give people a teaser. I'm going to have you go through 5, if you will, top tips. This concept of commander's intent. I'm going to have you, when we get to this slide again, talk about what you guys in the Air Force refer to as a time hack. I would also like you to talk about the power of checklists, why those are so important, the concept of a tape review, And one that I particularly think people can take a lot of value in is this concept of a red flag exercise. But first, let's just explain to them what you mean, Cujo, when you talk about a debrief. Let's talk about what is a debrief, and then let's talk about why and how to do it. So how would you give your definition? I have it up here from your book, but how would you give people the definition of what a debrief is?
It's the best form of leadership applied. It's where we constructively evaluate the quality of our decisions in relationship to the objectives that we set out to achieve. And it blends all the disciplines that we care about in terms of soft skills, how it is that we build teams, how it is that we nurture psychological safety, how it is we do things like root cause analysis, how it is that we inspire people to take ownership for doing what it is that they say that they do. And a debrief is where we get to practice. We get to practice things like vulnerability, compassion, empathy, self-awareness, a growth mindset, and integrity. And there's a bunch of oomph behind those words. When you combine those together, you create the conditions for an organization to win deeply, consistently, and in a way that builds collaboration and teamwork.
Well, the one thing that jumped, and no one's going to be able to read my writing, so I'll read it to them. This was on my first read through the book. I said, learning from failure makes failing a success. Not learning from
Amen.
success makes success a failure. So the two key components, two key questions, right? And in the sales coaching and the performance coaching model that I've been teaching for the last 25 years, it's two questions. Number one, what are we doing well? Too many people don't ask about the wins. You know, that they do something well and they take it for granted. They immediately go to what they're doing wrong. So talk about this concept that whenever we're looking at a piece of, whenever we're looking at behavior, we're looking to learn from it. Would you agree with that, Cujo? Would you go a little deeper on that?
100%. So in terms of looking at success, we live in a complex world. We're experiencing that right now by way of this global pandemic, but we see it even in the absence of the pandemic, just in the way that information is being shared, the way that the markets are evolving and shifting, the way that our competitors are growing. And in that complexity, we run into the risk of, if we're winning, it may not be because of us. And if we take our success for granted and just assume that it's going to continue in spite of our efforts, well, then we're probably buying risk and we're probably setting ourselves up to fail downstream. So we've got to analyze our successes with the same rigor, the same degree of scrutiny that we would with our failures. Now, another piece about understanding failure, and one that I see, and I actually fall into the bad habit of practicing with my kids, is we as leaders tend to have a tendency to find the fault, to focus on the fault, to correct the fault, and to move on. And if we don't celebrate the good things that are taking place even in the midst of failure, and dare I say, if we don't celebrate the heroics that are taking place even when we fail, then we're losing teamsmanship. We're losing the opportunity to build cohesiveness. We have people who we depend upon who are thinking about how I'm going to go get a job someplace else because they don't care about me here, because they don't see the great things that I'm doing, and all that they're talking about is correcting the errors. Right. And the final piece that I'd offer you, Dino, is that when we fail, I mean, I know you know me, both of us are going to be our harshest critics. We don't need somebody else to come in here and say, oh my gosh, that was horrible. Right. What we need actually is a coach that's willing to say, do you realize that you are 1 or 2 decisions away from winning today? And if you come out of your debrief with the idea that we were 1 or 2 decisions away from a victory, and that inspires you to go forth, you actually find yourself wanting to go get another swing of the bat.
Unbelievable.
And that's what we ought to
totally.
begin.
Totally,
Mm-hmm.
Totally. Too often, you know, and I shared this with you before the session, many entrepreneurs I know and top sales folks would agree with the statement that I'm going to make, which is we've all had times in our life when we absolutely had to close the next deal. And in those times, we do everything we need to do. The problem is because most organizations had stuff so good for the last couple of years, they didn't have to focus on doing things perfect. Their lives weren't at risk. So you came up with a model, and we'll spend just a little bit of time, but I just want people to know I'm constantly looking for a model in everything. And Cujo has a very powerful one, Raptor. Now, if you take the word Raptor and just take a pen out right now and write it, and here's the notes that I took in Cujo's live workshop that I went through. I wrote down Raptor. Just give them the 1 or 2 word summary, Cujo, around each of the steps of the process that you teach people to follow. Clearly, I know this is a workshop that you teach, and folks aren't going to get all the way through it. But if you could give people a sense of this model right now, what would that look like for them?
Okay, the first step in the whole concept is centered around the fact that we need to gather the data, the facts, the truth of what it is that's taking place around us. And the way that we do this is counter to how it is that we grow up as leaders in organizations. We're taught to believe that we have enough information to make an informed opinion, to make a judgment, to evaluate. And so we trust that we do that and we go forward with that. The danger is in a debrief setting where your whole idea is to learn. If you learn without the full truth, you may learn the wrong lesson and come up with the wrong way ahead, and potentially by risk in the process of doing this. And so we're going to take the time in a debrief to capture the accurate truth of what it was that happened. It means blending perspectives together. It's a collaborative process. And my rule of thumb, Dino, is...
So that's the R. Reconstruct what happened. That's the R.
That's reconstruct the truth of what happened. If you have 10 minutes to debrief, spend 6 minutes reconstructing the truth of what happened. If you're in doubt, if it feels awkward, spend an extra minute.
And the
That's how important it is.
Agree on the fundamental question. What do you mean by the fundamental question?
So let's say we're talking about a 3-month-long sales process. In 3 months, there's an almost unlimited amount of stuff we could talk about. To do so would be time prohibitive, and it would crush our teammates. Don't do that. Talk about the things that matter, which goes back to, if we understand what our purpose is, we have clearly articulated goals, let's ask ourselves, did we achieve them? And if we did, our fundamental question ought to be, why did we achieve our goals? Because we don't take success for granted. And the flip of that is, if we didn't achieve it, then why not? How are we going to move forward learning from that?
So as they read your book or as they go through, and I know you're building an online e-learning course, but it's reconstruct, agree, present, thoroughly agree on root causes. And there was an interesting thing that I took from your presentation. And again, no one's ever going to read my handwriting, but the root cause is almost never the last thing that happened prior to failure. What did you mean by that? Because I thought that was extremely powerful.
Yeah, so a lot of times what we do in our root cause analysis is we look at the last thing that happened just prior to the mistake, the accident, the mishap, the lost contract, whatever, and we go, okay, well that must be it, and that's enough. But unfortunately, most of the time, again in a complex world, the last thing that happened prior to success or failure is a symptom of the root cause. It is not by itself the root cause. And if we can get past that and we can start to examine further and go deeper, we're going to get to an answer that's sufficient or satisfying, that passes muster, that a jury of our peers would say, yep, that makes sense. And so the technique that many organizations use here is to ask why enough times to get to a level of sufficiency that allows us to now move forward meaningfully, if that makes sense.
We then organize our plan, and the R is rapid improvement, but it's interesting that the key word there is memorialization. So just spend a minute on this concept that you've put in the book that I know the military follows of memorialization.
Yeah, and actually this goes directly to your brain science work, Dino. We know that in order to learn, it helps us to write and to document. And so if we're doing that, things are sticking in our brain. At the end of a debrief, if we take the time, and my technique is to use a single sheet of paper, take the time to write down what was, what were the key findings, what was the problem that we were trying to solve, how did we go about solving it, what are we going to do moving forward. Now we've documented, we've reinforced in our minds what it is that we've allegedly learned. It's a theory until we've tested it. But now 2 things have happened. We've reinforced what it is that we've spent the time to do in the debrief. And by virtue of documenting it, now the next time that we go forward and do it, whatever it is that we do again, we can go and refer to this single sheet to help us to not make the same mistake over again. The
Right.
Thunderbirds do a brilliant job of doing this. The Thunderbirds, the U.S. Air Force aerial demonstration team, before any member flies their first mission as a Thunderbird pilot, they read every accident report for every team in the history of the program not to demoralize them, but rather to help them to not repeat the mistakes of the past. And it's a powerful tool.
Yep. So the entire process that is followed in the military starts with an expectation that there's going to be a debrief. Now, you guys use some terminology, and you know, we're at about the 30-minute mark here, Cujo, but I wanted to just spend, you know, if I say each one of these terms, tell me what comes to mind for these 5 tips that I want people to take from your book. Number 1, first term, commander's intent.
Tell me what success looks like. Give me an idea of what the end state is that we're marching out towards. Do it in short order so that I can understand it, so that I have a focus.
So you don't have to order everyone for all the tactics they're going to use. A CEO makes her intent known. Okay, second term, time hack.
Yeah, let's organize to be in synchronization with one another. Let's actually take the time to figure out what time it is right now, make sure that all of our watches are the exact same way, so that when I turn to 1:36 p.m., so do you. That sends us a mindset that says we're all in sync in accomplishing the end state, the commander's intent that we've been given. And that's a powerful force to help us to march out together.
Number 3, checklists. What comes to mind for you?
Organization, trying to solve the right problem the right way in the heat of the moment, in the chaos that we find ourselves in. If we can follow the discipline of checklists, it'll help us to avoid making mistakes or compounding mistakes when they've been made. And it'll also help us to soothe the soul and to calm ourselves down, to help us to navigate more effectively.
Yep. So you benefited today from a checklist that I created 2 weeks ago. I have a client who has made life psychologically safe for me. His name is Mark Lang. Mark has been my client for 20 years. Mark asked me to deliver a series of workshops globally for his company, and I totally blanked on one of them. My sister was not doing well health-wise. My father was not. This was just within this whole last few weeks. I was worried about my daughter and her health. I was worried about my father. I went for a walk in the neighborhood and completely blanked that I had this webinar scheduled. Mark's first question to me was, "Are you okay?" when he eventually reached me. My first question to him was, "Mark, what am I now going to do to make sure I never put you in that place again?" And I actually created a 6-point checklist that I followed with you today, including what time I sent you the slides and what time I set out T-minus 30 before I logged in. So the power of a checklist, so that I don't make that mistake again. Number 4, what comes to mind when I say tape review?
Tape review is the way that we prepare ourselves to come into a debrief. We don't expect that we're going to be able to remember everything to a sufficient degree without actually taking some time to reflect. So we'll set some time aside, before we go into a debrief, and we'll take, and in that time that we've gotten, we'll go back and in a fighter context, we'll physically look at tapes. In a business setting, we'll go back and scan the emails. We'll take a look at the capture that the scribe may have taken.
A debrief may take as much time as the actual event you're debriefing on.
It can. It doesn't have to be. It scales. But if you want to be disciplined and you want to start out the right way, let's say that you've partitioned an hour for a corporate debrief. I'd say spend at least a half an hour prior to getting all of your ducks in a row so that everybody comes armed with their best recollection of what happened. That's tape review.
Red flag exercise. This was extremely powerful to me when I thought about the number of pilots that got shot down before this happened. So share with the group what red flag exercise means.
Yeah, the short story is it's where we prepare for combat, where we try to minimize the casualties that we experienced in Vietnam in the first 10 missions by training incredibly robustly in a combat representative setting, so that when we go forward the first time and bad guys are shooting at us, it lowers our risk. We find ourselves better prepared, and we're also more survivable. And it's a fantastic way to approach anything business-wise if we can find a way to train and rehearse, to practice and to prepare before we go into the setting that we're going to find ourselves in. Imagine how that changes the dynamic, how that soothes the soul again and allows us to put our best foot forward where it really matters.
Awesome. So how many flight hours have you had, Cujo? How many hours, and how old were you the first time you flew a jet?
I was 22 when I first flew a jet, Dino. I've got just shy of 2,000 hours, courtesy of the cancer story.
And what percentage of those hours were followed with a debrief?
100%, Dino. 100% ended with a debrief.
When we think about high performance machines, folks, whether it's a car, whether it's a fighter pilot, needs maintenance, needs ongoing tune-ups, right? This is a process. This is a toolkit you guys can follow. In fact, Cujo, this is a quote from your book. So why don't you go ahead and read it to folks?
Unfortunately, I can no longer see your screen, so I'm gonna have to rely on you on this one, Dino.
The most important part, the single most important part of every mission was the debrief. The single most important part of a mission. Why did you say that?
Because that's where the learning takes place. And the testing of the theories happens while we're flying. So it's a little bit inverse to what you might think. But if we come out of today's mission armed and equipped with ways to make better decisions tomorrow, those are theories that we then put into practice when we go and execute tomorrow. And the most important thing that we can do is to verify and validate that what our theories were actually worked. And that only takes place in a debrief. If you look it up online, if you look at the term debrief, 100% of people surveyed will tell you it's the most important thing that we do in fighter aviation, bar none.
3 things you're looking to do in a debrief. Number 1, learn from any mistake. Number 2, celebrate any success. And number 3, build your culture so that you're documenting and memorializing these stuff. And again, I'm quoting from your book and people can't see it. I had you go through your 5 tips. I'm going to give them a bonus tip, which is if you're ever lost and don't know where you are in a debrief process, whenever you're in doubt, lead with finding the good. What did you mean when you said? What did you mean when you said that to the group?
I mean, truly, there's always good to be found. If you want to inspire your teammates in times of disruption, if you're trying to figure out the chart forward where everything is murky and dark, find the good, lead with it. It's going to open the path to victory. It always does. It always does. And once you've conditioned yourself to do that, it's going to change how it is that you lead. It's going to change the dynamic in which your teammates bring forth their contributions. It's what we need right now in the midst of this pandemic, Dino.
Right. And the question I asked is, would you do this stuff if lives depended on it? By the way, would you do this stuff if 21-year-olds were keeping you safe? I got a picture of my dad when he was 21 years old. He just emailed this. He's in his flight suit. He was a radar guy on a P-3 Orion. You know that plane? I think they're still flying them, aren't they? Aren't they, Rob?
I do. They are. Yes. Yep.
And you talk about this. He was chasing Russian subs around the world, and he was keeping them away from Cuba and the rest of us. And their tagline for their unit was "No sanctuary in the deep," which is pretty powerful. The Navy had a process, right? And here's a shot my dad sent of his tactical coordinator, the lieutenant on his plane, reviewing the documents behind the cockpit. So folks, think about how your brain works and how your team's brain works. They're constantly scanning the environment, looking for cues, looking for shortcuts, patterns. If you put a debrief process in place, you're creating a routine, a process. And in that process, if you follow the tips Rob's given you and connect your values with your behaviors, you're making it safe for your employees. So Rob, I'm giving people here on the screen a way to connect you at your email address. I know that they can link in with you. Well, let me ask, are they okay linking in with you on LinkedIn and sending you emails
Absolutely.
if they have questions?
Absolutely. Bring all your questions.
You deliver webinars, you deliver keynotes. I know that you've been doing some ongoing coaching with clients. Tell us a little bit about the online course you're working on, because I'm excited about that for you.
Yeah, so it's going to complement all the work that we do live, and actually it's going to replace some of the work that we do live for those that can't have access to it, so that everybody's got it. And it's not just focused at organizations, but there's a portion of this that's focused at youth, and taking and applying what it is that we know from high performance teamwork into youth settings so that we can build a new generation of leaders that come out of high school better equipped to lead.
Awesome. Rob, you matter to me very much. I think you're a rock star. I'm going to show a slide here of one of my favorite rock stars who I met a few years ago. This is me and Chris Robinson of the Black Crows. And as I've said with the last couple of guests, when I met Chris, I brought a ticket from 1990 and asked him to sign it. And he said, "Are you trying to make me feel old?" I said, "No, man, I'm trying to make you feel loved." And I'm glad I'm on the planet
Beautiful.
with you, Chris. It's the same thing I said when I met you. I was trying to make you feel loved, and I felt the same thing when I asked you for your autograph. So Rob, as I put up my last couple of slides, any final things you'd like to share with the group before I talk about the next guest and end with my final slide?
Yeah, I appreciate you, Dino. I admire and respect the work that you're doing. To the group that's here today, realize we have a tremendous opportunity in the midst of this pandemic with all of the disruption that's taking place. And part of it is to figure out who we really are and to build teams that really matter. And one of the things that I would encourage you to do right now is to document everything that's taking place. Take screenshots of the Zoom or go to meeting sessions that you're doing with your teammates. Keep all the paperwork that you get for the loans and whatever other things that you're doing, put it in a gigantic binder, which is going to be the story of how you came through these difficult times, this version of war that you're experiencing right now, because it's going to define the culture that you have on the back end. It's going to be the thing that you rally around as you look forward to the future, and it's going to be the thing that you use to share your story with your newest members, your newest teammates, a year, 5 years, 10 years down the road, and it's going to be powerful. Take advantage of this and do this to document and chart the journey that you're on right now. That's all I've got, Dino.
That is awesome, man. Awesome. And we are always starting different. We're never starting over. So folks, I did an interview 2 weeks ago with Dr. Bill Crawford. I posted that for folks if they'd like to see it. It's up on YouTube and my website. I also created an interview with Michael Olasso. This week, Rob, Cujo, thank you, brother. I'm going to have the recording posted and give you and all your folks access to it. Next week, if you guys would like to attend, I have a dear friend, entrepreneur, author, Bill Wooditch. Bill is one of, well, I'll let Bill share with you some of the exciting stuff that he's done on TV and in other places. And if anyone wants to reach out to me, here is my email address. Rob, I'm going to stop the recording in a minute, but I just wanted to say thank you, brother. We went a little bit long, but the content I wanted people to have.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you and everything that you're doing.
All right, man. Take care. In 3, 2, and 1.